I'm so excited, everybody, y'all. It hit me. And we're
very,
live.
very cool.
It hit me yesterday that in October I'll have a TV show. Like,
that's amazing. It really is amazing.
I've been praying for it for so long. I have it now, and I'm like, I don't even know what to do first. I'm like, I don't even know what to do first. So so much to do, but I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see where this all evolves. So if you guys see me doing this, it's because there's sunlight right here, and it's like the best part of the house. So, and I'm not in my normal stage. So, all right, you guys, say hey as you come in. I'm really excited. I feel like speaking of that show, someone commented that we should really continue having discussions around mental health and domestic violence and things like that. So I feel like for anybody who's coming on here, for those who don't know, I'm getting ready to have a TV show in October. The TUF Woman Table will become a TV show, is becoming a TV show. So it's going to go completely panel. I don't know if I'll do stories. I might do one season of stories, but for right now, it's going to be a panel. So I feel like as it develops, we're going to continue having panels like this about domestic violence, some about mental health, and just women's issues and things that we're not talking about it. Because just a segue, when I got into this, and a lot of you have been on the show with me, you guys know this. When I got into this, it was because I felt that there was a lack of real productive conversation, especially in regards to issues that women dealt with. And I wanted to be kind of like that platform that was not afraid to have those difficult conversations. So it's now interesting how when you keep moving forward in a singular mission, you are eventually granted the platform that allows you to do that. Because the beautiful thing about this platform and this network is that I'm going to get complete and total creative freedom. And Kirsten is going to be on that platform with me. TV show too. It's cool because for anybody who's out there, a lot of places are going to tell you how you have to show up, how's your content got to look, what do you got to do, and you're going to have a lot of your voice taken away. So I'm really excited to just get freaking louder, man. Awesome. All right, you guys. So as you guys come in, say hey. Tonight we're talking about domestic violence. We're having another domestic violence roundtable. I'm really excited. This is such a popular panel that I think this has actually turned itself into a series. So I'm really excited to get started. As you guys come in, say hey. Let us know how you're doing. Where are you coming from? YouTube, Facebook. What part of the world are you in? Because we've been getting some people from Africa. And, Rose, you are in Australia, so I know that you've probably got some of your audience there. And so it's really neat to see where everybody comes from. But tonight, you guys, again, we are going to be discussing domestic violence. We're going to be talking about utilizing our chaos as a catalyst to springboard us forward.
Without county school.
Oh, I'm not worried about it, baby. And you guys are going to see my son potentially. And we're going to be talking about creating an exit strategy. I've had a couple women mirror back to me that understanding how to get out of this situation and what that looks like is very important. And then lastly, we really want to talk about the road to recovery and what does that look like, because, it's not just a one size fits all, like you get out and then, it looks this way. So I'm really blessed to have 3 women from 3 different spectrums of, domestic violence coming in, sharing their stories and sharing how it is that they move forward from all this. So without further ado, I'm going to drop into my intro. And again, as you guys come in, please feel free to interject yourself into the conversation. I feel like this is just as much your conversation as it is ours. So please feel free to comment. We will bring comments up onto the screen. And then if you feel called to do so, please share this amazing panel. Continue sharing all these episodes so I can continue bringing more people on and we can get more eyes and ears onto these conversations. So without further ado, hello and welcome to the TUF Woman Roundtable, you guys. And I just, hold on a second. Oh, I got the wrong copy, you guys. It's all good. Ashley's brain is. All right. Yes, sir. The TUF Woman Roundtable. Sorry, you guys. TUF Woman Roundtable. Lord have mercy. Help me, Jesus.
You have your media manager there too, huh, Ash?
Huh? My kids got my phone. For anybody out there, his son's on the phone and he keeps telling me all this stuff. It's like I don't. It's all good right now, right? So this TUF Woman roundtable is a space for all people to pull up their seat, connect, and create some epic conversations, you guys. So at TUF Woman, I believe that all people have the power within themselves to live life authentically, free from fear, confident in who they are, and empowered to live a life that sets their soul on fire. I also believe that by one person showing up in their authentic truth, like all these women here, we give other people permission to step into their own truth as well, thus giving us the opportunity to rise up together. It is through this joint rising that we move ourselves and humanity forward to a more beautiful way of living in peace. So pull up a seat, you guys, tune in and join us as we create epic conversation that moves, and we remind everyone of how truly powerful we all are within. So, all right, you guys. So first and foremost, as per the usual with these panels, I would love for you ladies just to introduce yourselves, give yourselves a couple minutes and explain about who you are, and just tell everybody a little bit about your story in regards to this panel. You know, it's always wonderful to connect through stories. So I'm going to go counterclockwise. Kirsten, if you want to kick it off and tell everybody a little about who you are and a little bit about your story.
Sure. Yeehaw. Yes, I'm Kirsten. I'm from California. I live in Los Angeles. I have survived some domestic violence, I suppose, since I was 23 years old. That was when I had my first circumstance. When I filed my first restraining order, you know how that is. So that really kicked off a whole season of kind of conditioning myself to accept less than great behavior. And now I'm in a place in my life where I have 2 children. One is already grown, and I am in a situation where I've rebuilt my life to facilitate my advocacy and activism work around helping victims and being a voice for those who either are still in a relationship and having issues, or are not here anymore and they need someone to speak for themselves. So this work really matters to me a lot. I've started a company called Beauty Boundaries that facilitates moderation and mediation between parents and teenagers to develop healthier habits within their the context of their lives with pertaining to relationships. Yeah.
That's awesome. Awesome. I love it. I love it. I love it. All right, Anna, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I came to a relationship with some childhood trauma from, there were a couple of adults that lived in my neighborhood. One of them was involved with the school that greatly affected my childhood. And so I had some unhealed childhood trauma, which I think is very common with people that, not always the case, but it's common with people that end up getting into these types of relationships. So I had things like I was a people pleaser, I was codependent, I needed external validation, I always put others' needs before my own, and I tolerated abusive behavior. And when I say that, I only mean emotionally abusive behavior, because there are so many subtle forms of emotionally abusive behavior that a lot of people don't realize are actually abuse. And so because I did not have healthy boundaries and didn't know what those were, that left me prone to tolerating emotionally abusive behavior. So I came to this relationship with all of that, and that made me vulnerable to emotional abuse. And so I went through that relationship. It was very long. And I survived it, and I have been out of it for a while now, and still in my recovery. But it's interesting because I resolved all of those things. All of those issues are fully resolved now. It taught me a lot. So now I'm like I said, I'm still in the middle of my recovery, but it opened my eyes to this phenomenon of oppression, whether it's oppression of people because of their gender, because of their race, or because of other things. And so I'm just very passionate about helping people become free of different forms of oppression. And I'm just kind of letting this evolve organically. I don't know where I'll go with it, whether it'll be a coaching practice or what, but I definitely understand from my experience the lack of understanding and awareness around abuse. You know, in my case, emotional abuse. And so I want to help raise awareness of that so that people, when they're in this type of relationship, first of all, they know that it's abuse. And then secondly, if somebody watching this or listening to this has a friend who's describing certain things to them about their relationship, that their friend or family member can recognize that it's abuse. Because in my case, for years, people didn't. And so that's what I want to do for the rest of my life is help the world become better with all of that.
I love that. And I think that at one point we're going to have a panel on helping be an advocate for our friends who are in these situations. Like, what does it mean to be a good advocate in somebody's life? Because I had one woman who was going to be on the panel, and she talked about being friends even when it's hard. She said, because sometimes you are the only person that they have. And even though they might keep going back to this situation and it might take them 12 years to leave or whatever, she's like, you might be the only way they leave finally, because they know they can come to you. She said, so, you know, it's always good to, you know, look for the signs, but also know to just keep supporting them even when it's hard. And I said, I didn't even think of that either. She said, because think about it, if they've been isolated, if somebody's been isolated from their family by the abuser, she said, and you're the only person they have left. And then you go, you know what? I just can't handle this anymore. You keep going back. And I just don't think that I can be friends with you right now. They're like, you basically kind of like not putting responsibility on you, but, you know, you might be their last hope. And then they're like, you know what? I can't reach out to anybody now. And you know, so it's interesting that you talked about that, because I think that's something that would be a phenomenal one going down the road. It's like, how do we become advocates for our friends, as well as understanding our own boundaries within that, you know, that friendship as well. So Rose, you are our last one. Tell us a little bit about you and what it is that brought you onto this panel.
Well, I am a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and for many years, I guess had undiagnosed mental health issues, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 50s with PTSD and bipolar and emotional dysfunction disorder, and that stemmed from the childhood abuse. All through my life, I've had, I guess, toxic relationships. I've looked for that space where, you know, sex was love. That's how I thought about it, because, you know, if my father loved me in that way, then, you know, other men would love me, you know, and I would have sex with them, and that was love. So I got married, I don't know, back in 1986, and had my first child in 87. My first husband, I found out when I was pregnant with my second child, was either a weirdo because he'd collect ladies' underpants, or he was having an affair in our house, because my mother found some underwear when she came to clean the house one day because I was unwell. And then before the marriage really ended, I actually met somebody else. And through that marriage, for about the first 10 years, he was abusive to me. And most of it was fueled because we used to drink, and so it was fueled with alcohol, basically. But his opinion, and he'd been brought up in an environment where the man's word was law, and, you know, the woman just did what she was told, and if she didn't, she'd get a smack around the head or whatever. But I'm still with that man, surprisingly enough, and our relationship is like almost perfect now. I think through his understanding that his behaviour wasn't acceptable, and that he had to change the way he was to stay with me, because I know that he loves me a great deal, and I love him too. And so I'm not saying that, you know, you should stay with an abusive partner, but our relationship's a little bit unique in that, you know, his behaviours early on were learned behaviours, I guess. And so I taught him how to unlearn those behaviours, and so we're still together. And at the moment, what brought me on the panel was here in Australia, we run. In Adelaide, in Australia, we run a free Pamper Day event for domestic violence survivors. So we get business owners to come in and they donate their time and their resources. So, things like Reiki and massage and, makeup and hair and whatever. And then we get survivors to come along and have a day of pampering, and it's totally free.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful.
And so that's so through my advocacy against domestic violence, it got me involved in these Pamper Days, and and so I'm quite passionate about carrying on these days and and helping survivors at least have one day, whether they're still in a situation or whether they've come out the other side. They're still entitled to come and have this day of nurturing and love. So that's how I ended up here.
All right, awesome. And you actually gave me some thoughts while I was going here, thoughts of other things to talk about. So thank you so much, ladies, for all of you being here. So we're gonna kick this off with talking about chaos as a catalyst, because a lot of the times we get into these situations and it's easy to feel that this is a very hopeless situation, and it's always going to be like this. And so we tend to feel as if there's no way we're ever going to move forward from it. So I really want to get your thoughts on basing, obviously off your personal experience, how do we start utilizing a violent or chaotic situation? Because I feel like this is going to tie really nicely into creating an exit strategy, but how do we start utilizing these situations as ways to springboard us forward into a place where we don't feel hopeless and we can begin even contemplating leaving, right? Because it's not that you automatically just, boom, go into an exit strategy. It's that you have hope that the situation doesn't have to remain the same, so for me, my marriage ending was this, everything imploded in one day. And I knew this was it. You need to get out, right now, this is your cue, get out, whatever you have to do. So I knew, and that was my hope. My hope was you know what, because the cops came and got him, and it's you know what, this is it, get out. You can take the kids and you can leave. So, Kirsten, I'm going to start with you. We'll go counterclockwise on this one, and then we'll go into exit strategies after that. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on utilizing chaos as a catalyst, especially how you were able to turn that chaos into catalyst and use it as a way to not feel like you were stuck.
Right. Well, it took me a little bit of time a long time actually. Can you hear me, Ashley?
I muted myself. I was trying to make sure because I was hearing echo. I was muting everyone. I'm good now.
Okay. Am I okay? Okay. Am I good? All right. Good. Are you okay? Okay. Okay. So yes, I was really faced with an intervention. This is how I had to get out of it. I had my girlfriends and my therapist who had already been very suspicious of different types of abuse that had been escalating over several years that were major indicators. But it took the escalation of physical violence to really kick me out of being in a state where I was just completely conditioned to accept and make excuses, make it my fault, rationalize. I would process things in a way that were always just very much coping to keep me basically accepting. I was always in acceptance, or I'm also a fixer, so I just always thought I could contribute something to make it work. And it got to the point where my life was in physical danger to really see what what could possibly be happening if I were to stay. And the final straw was actually an issue that involved social services taking my child because of remaining in a relationship for so long and having an actual restraining order used against me that proved the violence had been taking place for so long. If it weren't for my child being lost, I would have definitely still been in this relationship. So it was a huge wake-up call. But it all started with having people that loved me and cared for me and could see the health that was potentially ahead in my future. And I like to really emphasize that while you're in a state of chaos and gaslighting and just perpetual blame, you do not see it yourself out of that. It's very hard. So that's why it is very helpful to have people that can keep you accountable. The problem that we have running into this is that as much as these people love me and I trusted them and cared for them, I was deeply embarrassed. I was deeply ashamed. I felt stupid, and you'll hear this a lot from different survivors, and this is textbook. I mean, for me, it was completely textbook. I felt like I deserved it. And it really took a lot of therapy and working out the details that I have this mechanism of survival that has been ingrained in me to endure. And it got to the point, like I said, it became like a physical hazard for me to stay. And then it became my child's life being put at risk. And that's where I had to draw the line. Being a mother and being a woman, that's obviously my priority is protecting my kids' lives. So, and then was it the second follow-up question to that, Ashley?
Well, I think you tried into it. It was just really about like, how can we utilize that chaos as a springboard to move us forward from not feeling so helpless, so hopeless. So it's really like, how do we utilize that chaos as a springboard to start moving us into thinking about an exit strategy and actually having the, courage. And I don't say that people who haven't left or still in it are not any less courageous, but it's like, how do we go from feeling hopeless to feeling courageous enough to leave? Because there are so many people I feel that are out there that are like, one day I'm going to leave. And it's just like really having an extra springboarded step to be like, you know what, I'm leaving now. Like that was my thing. I was staying in it and I knew I needed to leave. And then finally got this, it's like, if you don't leave now, you're never going to leave. Like, if you don't leave now, you're never going to leave. So it's like, how did you utilize that chaos as a springboard for you to start getting out of that situation? Because I think when you came on the show, you talked about your timeline of leaving was like there was a certain few months where you had to really build up to actually getting out finally.
Right. My exit strategy began 2 months before I was actually physically assaulted. And the problem with this is that there's times when survivors and victims need to realize they might not have more time. There's a time element to this. And honestly, educating yourself and having discussions like this are tremendously helpful, because we're still kind of getting out of the age of having this be such a huge taboo. Okay, it's not like we're educated. It's in how not to be abused or how not to be abusive. This is something that is not addressed in the school system. This is where I personally feel like I can come in, do an assembly, fill up a lecture hall, and have some concrete examples and get some concrete solutions on how to divert and get help and get the progress moving along for humanity. And that's what my company is really all about, is about opening these discussions to the younger folk, to the younger generations that can actually be part of this movement, where throughout the course of history, we could be getting to a point where every generation is less and less toxic. And that is my goal.
Amen.
I think that really, like, honestly, even just I'm a big believer in emoting and getting things off your chest when they happen and not containing, because what happens when we contain is that we start justifying, we start making excuses. Pretty soon, like, this is not reality anymore. And we need to stay grounded in the reality, and we need to be aware, we need to wake up. The education level, I think, is huge. talking about it in a way where you don't feel embarrassed, don't feel shy, don't feel stupid. That needs to happen. For me, like, I will admit all my mistakes. I will give you all the little hints and misgivings that occurred throughout my timeline as signals. So the younger teens, boys, girls, it doesn't matter, but people need to be in tune to these. And without talking about them, we don't have that discussion. Like, it takes people like us that are going to risk our reputations and not really care. Like, honestly, like, who cares? This is for the greater good. I don't mind. If you have to be like, if you're a lawyer and you have high profile clients and you just don't want your clients to be attached to what's going on in your life, I get that. But for me, like, no, my purpose in life is now like making sure that teenagers or kids can grow up to be better people and get themselves out of trouble, shall they be into trouble. So that's why Ashley, honestly, tipping your hat to you. I mean, this is why this is so valuable and why I need to participate every time you have something. And I try to always join you. I mean, for me, this is where it starts. It's the origin.
I love that. And you know what's great about this is every time you guys talk, I'm like taking copious notes because I'm like, oh my God, these are like show episodes. Like, because that's one of the other one. It's like, how do we start having the conversations with our kids? Because really, one thing I think most of you guys will know that I talk about is like, we are really the direct reflection of how our children will become. So it's like, what kind of people do we want to put into the world? You know, what kind of people? I remember having a conversation with my daughter about, before we go on to the next two, you know, what happens if one day I decide that I'm gay and I like women? And I said, well, that's fine. You like women, that's okay. You know, and having that conversation with her around how that might look in her life and how would she want that to look. And, you know, and making it normal like that to me was important. Like, let's just have this conversation. What would that look like to you? How would you feel about it? So again, it's like you said, taking the taboo away and just normalizing the conversation, having the conversation, like being okay to talk about periods without somebody going, you know what I mean? Like, it's a very natural part. All right, so Anna, same question to you. So what does it look like to start utilizing your chaos as a catalyst to move yourself forward into going down the road of an exit strategy and just finally being able to leave?
The important thing for me was being aware that I was actually being abused. So that is the catalyst for a lot of people, because the type of abuse that I survived was 99.9% emotional. And it was done by somebody who's very soft-spoken, very kind, and very kind to others. And so that's why it's so hard to recognize. For the longest time, I just didn't realize. And that's something that I realized with many, many abusers, is they can seemingly be as kind as Mother Teresa. But over here, they're abusive to specific people. And that's one thing that people need to realize. I don't care how nice somebody seems, they can be an abuser. So mine was covert narcissism, what I dealt with. So the first step to being able to leave was actually recognizing what was happening to me. And the interesting thing is, this was 12 years into this relationship that I recognized that it was happening. And this was 2015. And the crazy thing is, I recognized it as abuse because I know this because I journal. I've journaled since I was 12 years old. And so I journaled that I was I was dealing with abuse. And then I actually figuratively went back to sleep because I forgot. I just forgot. And then I woke up again in January of 2017 when a friend of mine who has experience working with abused children, when I was just venting to her about what my spouse was doing, she said, Anna, that sounds like emotional abuse. And so then it woke me up again. But I just mentioned that I went to sleep because, I forgot, because we are so conditioned, and so, every case is a little bit different, but mine, it was just, they talk about with domestic abuse, they talk about mind control. And it really is very much like that. You just become so brainwashed over time. And so when I regained that awareness in 2017, that was the first thing. And starting to recognize, what helped me was the knowledge. Knowledge is power. So obviously, so looking up the tactics of emotional abuse, like manipulation, like, constantly putting you down, telling you that your perception of reality is wrong, controlling or trying to dissuade you from doing certain things like that. And mine was a more subtle form. So it wasn't totally controlling, like, you can't do this, but it was sort of, trying to dissuade me from seeing my friends. So when I became aware, that was the first thing. And then journaling really helped me, because I would journal what happened. I would write down what happened, because so often in abuse, when stuff happens, when the abuser is being abusive, almost every time they deny it. That's their MO. And because they're so charismatic and convincing, and they gaslight you, you, after a period of years, believe them. And when I woke up and started journaling stuff, if he would say that it didn't happen, I could look back. And so journaling helped me regain a grip on reality. And it boosted my confidence, because I could tell myself, okay, I'm not crazy. This is happening, and my perception is correct. So those two things. And then the other thing for me was the knowledge. This was huge for me, is the knowledge that when a child witnesses abuse, I'm talking about emotional abuse, which is worse than physical abuse, and emotional abuse in my case, any form of abuse, when a child witnesses that, that is abusive to the child. And I learned that from a mental health counselor. So all this time, I had stayed in this marriage for my child, because I thought it was better for my child. Once I knew that, then I said, no, I cannot stay, because I am damaging my child by staying in this relationship. So there was that. And then there was also the fact that I realized that if I stay in this relationship that is so hurtful to me, I'm modeling an example to my child, my daughter, that women, it's okay for a woman to stay in an abusive relationship. I'm showing my daughter that that's okay. And on the flip side, by leaving that relationship, I'm showing my daughter an example of how to be a strong woman and how to love yourself. And so all of those things were the catalysts for me to leave. And then the last thing that I needed to do in my case was to actually build up enough physical energy to leave. And that took me 2 years to actually do that, because I knew that it was going to be stressful to get divorced. And I knew that I didn't have the energy, because this marriage had just sucked the life force out of me, as it does for so many people, because the stress from the abuse just is exhausting. And when that goes on for years and years and years, it has huge effects on your physical energy and health. So I just took that time. Really, I think since 2015, I put it in the back of my mind that, okay, I've got to plan. And then I kind of went back to sleep. Like I said, in the meantime, we bought a house together, and I just was in like automatic pilot, and just so often people are in survival mode, and that's why they do the things that they do. And with his charisma, he convinced me to buy a home. And so we did that. But all the time in the back of my mind, I had set in motion the goal to regain my physical energy. And so I did a lot of natural stuff. a lot of self-care to regain my physical energy. And by 2017, when my friend who woke me up again said that's emotional abuse, and then I Googled it, that was actually the night of Trump's inauguration. And the next day I went to the Women's March in St. Pete, in Tampa Bay, where I live. Anyway, and so in early 2017, I made my decision. And it took me from January until November to actually announce to him, because I was so scared. So I tell people, take the time you need to take. I mean, I put a lot of things in place. I planned, I interviewed lawyers. I interviewed 5 different lawyers. I created an exit strategy. And one of the things that really was helpful, and what I would advise anybody who is looking to leave a relationship, is the thought of it alone is overwhelming. When you're entrenched and invested with somebody, even if you're not married, if you're living together, or if you are married, or regardless, if you're living together, if you have kids together, all of these things. And in my case, I had left my corporate job. I did have some income, thank God, from Airbnb, which I had started. But it's overwhelming, and because you're under so much stress, it affects your cognition. Because depression is a huge part of this, because the stress affects your adrenals, which affect your entire endocrine system, which shuts down your digestion, which affects your gut health, and your gut health affects your brain. And so it's very, very typical for people who are oppressed, and this is just a form of oppression, which is why I am so very much an advocate against racism as well, because that is it's another form of oppression. Wow. Anyway, in order to combat the overwhelm, I just made a list, and I actually got on the phone with my sister, who was wonderful. She's very practical, and she's like, Anna, you need to do A, B, C, and D. You need to do this, then you need to do this. And so you just make a list of the things you need to do. You need to, where are you going to live? What is your source of income going to be? Those are the big things. How is it going to look for the divorce? How are you going to handle that? And it's a lot, but you just take it piece by piece, step by step. And, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And that's what you do when you leave an abusive relationship. It's almost like, I don't know, or maybe how do you get to a mountaintop? Well, you climb it, and you go in stages. And it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And I would say, too, I was determined not to screw myself financially. And so luckily, my dad's a lawyer, not a divorce lawyer, but he is a lawyer. So I consulted him. But, you can also consult, most lawyers will give you a free, at least in the US, will give you a free consultation to see if you want to work with them. And so you can get some information that way. So I did a lot of research on that. And those were the things that helped me move forward. And I also looked at what is the cost if I stay here in this relationship. Because I think so often we're just in our comfort zone. We're used to, okay, I've got my place to live. I've got my financial situation, childcare situation, all of these things. And, but I knew long-term, I was very aware, because so much damage had been done to me already, physically, emotionally, psychologically. I could feel it, like it was literally physically killing me. I could feel the inflammation in my body. And so I looked at how much worse is this going to get if I stay in this relationship? And it's interesting, everybody's story is different. I commend Rose for being able to change the situation. I just looked at the statistics, and I knew that, because I did a crap load of research, which I'm sure we all have on this panel. And I just from what I read is that it's very rare for people to change, and so I wanted out, and so that was the knowledge of that was also the catalyst.
Awesome. And I love that. Such a really thorough answer. So, Rose, I'm going to let you also answer the same question. So it's like, how do we turn the chaos and the catalyst and use chaos as a catalyst? We're going to have one more topic. We may go a little over, but I really want to talk about is after this, Rose, I want you to talk about how to utilize chaos as a catalyst. And if you actually want to talk about a little bit what it means to I guess it looks a little different in your situation because you stayed. So if you want to talk about what it looks like to utilize that as a way to change the dynamics of that relationship so that it's no longer mirroring an abusive relationship. But I want to talk about exit strategies after we get off of this topic. So Rose, if you'll tell us a little bit about what it looked like to utilize chaos as a catalyst in your life.
I guess in the first marriage, he was quite needy, so I was probably more his mother than I was his wife. Because I'm quite a strong person, so yeah, and I'm stubborn. But because of my mental health issues, I too was quite needy. So, and not knowing it. And I didn't know that my first husband was actually abusive by the way he was clingy. And, even after we'd separated, whilst I was, when I was about 3 months pregnant with our second child, he would stalk me. Like I would go out and he'd be there. So, yeah. And, can I take you home? Can I do this? But he didn't want anything to do with the child at all. And even though that I guess, prostituted myself after my son was born to try and get my first husband to even acknowledge that, his son was alive and whatever, he just wouldn't do that. And so we were separated when I met my second husband. And it was just a chance meeting. Really, he used to come into my work and talk to my boss because they were quite close friends, and they were involved in the local football club. And, so we just met on a river cruise one night, and it just sort of happened from there. But the relationship, I don't know, it was a bit odd. We weren't heavy drinkers to start with. We just used to drink on the weekends. But I'd say something to him, and I didn't use the right tone, or didn't use the right words or whatever. And because I was well, I didn't understand why he got angry at me, basically. And then it'd end up in a huge fight, and usually I'd get a smack around the head or whatever. And I didn't fight back for a long time. And then one night, I just really cracked it. I really just cracked it. And I just hit him back and bruised his face. I just had enough. I just punched him. And I thought, don't hit me ever again. And then we moved to another state, and the fight still continued. And so one night I just went in the bedroom and just smashed everything in there, like the lamps, all the pictures that were hung on the wall. I mean, I chucked a real raz. I really did. And after that night, he could see how bad my temper was. And so after that, he didn't try and hit me ever again after that one, because he knew that if he hit me again, that I could just fly off the handle, and he didn't want that. So I proved that I could be just as strong and just as, I guess, just as violent as he was, and he didn't like that. So we sat down and talked about it, and he was he didn't realize that his behavior was upsetting me. He just thought it was a normal part of being a husband. The wife just does what she's told. And he came to realize that, that I was quite a strong person and that I didn't need to be, kept in line because really, we're partners. We're equals in the relationship. We're not once, more powerful than the other person. So I guess I had thought about leaving. We had, by that time, when we'd moved, I had 2 kids from the previous marriage, and then we'd had 1 child together. And I thought about leaving, but I loved him, and I knew that I'm the eternal optimist, and I knew that I could change something around. I just knew it would work if we just kept trying at it, and which we did. And so now, he does have the occasional dig at me, like, I've put a lot of weight on recently, and so he says, geez, you've put some weight on, or, get your hair cut. And he said, oh, which hair did you get done? So, but I ignore those comments because I think, well, he's just being a dick. So basically, so I don't let it bother me. So I can't really, because my situation is so much different than the others, where I've not really had to leave a relationship. But what I would advise, I guess, if I'm allowed to, Ashley, is that look out for those little signs, and if you know that, don't hide from your family, don't hide from your friends, and if you're feeling threatened, even with verbal or emotional abuse, there's got to be a line drawn in the sand. You've got to stand up for yourself. You do. You've got to make that the effort to look after you. Because I know my children, or my daughters, or my eldest daughter, she won't get married because she probably heard and saw most of the abuse that was happening, and she has no inclination to marry. She just thinks that marriage is just a crock of shit. So excuse my language, but yeah, she just thinks it's not worth anything. And my other daughter, my youngest daughter, she's in a relationship and she's very happy, but she won't cop any rubbish from anybody. So, and she's had a few boyfriends that have given her some grief, and she'd come to me and she'd ask my advice, and I say, well, get out. He's not worth the time of day or the breath that he's breathing. And my son, he's had a few relationships too, but he wouldn't ever harm any woman. I've brought him up to the fact that women are your equals. They're not your slaves. They're not your maids. They're not your whatever. They're your partners, and they're there to be loved and cherished. So I think I've done a pretty good job as a mum, despite the fact that I've been a little bit lax in some areas, but overall, I think getting out it's really important. You just need to be aware of the signs and just listen, and if your friends are telling you, get out, you need to listen to them, because they can see things that you can't, because you live in that situation, and so they can see other things that you can't see, and they're just looking after you. And you just need to be mindful of that.
I love that, and I want to say thank you so much to all of you for sharing that, because you guys are all in vastly different situations, and I think it's a wonderful covering of how domestic violence is not a one-size-fits-all situation. We all go through some form of abuse, and it all looks different. Exit strategies all look different. And so actually, we were supposed to talk about exit strategy, but I think this is actually a much more important topic, and something that all of you have actually mirrored. And it's talking about how abuse becomes learned behavior, how the things we see as children end up dictating our patterns. So I would actually like to talk on this as our last subject before we get off here, if you guys are okay with that. I feel like we're going to come back to this again, and then we can discuss exit strategies and stuff. But I really want to touch a moment on what it means to understand abuse, starting with things that we learn in childhood. So is it that abuse is genetically like programmed into us, or do you guys believe that abuse really isn't a learned behavior, and that we take on as children by either watching it or internalizing it in some other way or form? So Kirsten, I'm going to start off with you again. What are your thoughts? Because you're an advocate for this. So what are your thoughts about abuse becoming a learned behavior, as well as women being conditioned to actually be programmed for abuse?
I definitely think that there's a huge aspect of conditioning, modeling, seeing things in front of you that you can somehow justify and you see your family members justify. I believe that we have not had the correct tools and modifications that are needed to exist in order for correct prevention to take place. I definitely believe in it, that people are born good. I believe that we are swarmed with centuries of war and famine and disease and a lot of things that have created certain mental illness in many different sects around the world, different locations. I mean, when you think about origins and trauma that's passed down through generations, and like I think we mentioned last time, Ashley, was the lineage of having your great grandfather. I mean, if you think about it, look, wife beating was still okay in 1920. That's the year my grandmother was born. So if you're thinking about all those years prior to that, I mean, this is a huge aspect of how we dealt with things. I mean, physical punishment has always been on the books. It's in the Bible. So, I mean, there's a lot of things about the way that society has always been ran that facilitate this. And even like in some countries in Asia, there's a lot of different tactics and techniques to keep people in line. I mean, these things still exist. How to get things out of terrorists in terms of torture. I mean, there's a huge level of exerting yourself physically in order to control or exhibit power. And honestly, it's old school. Really, there's an element of that. So I think honestly, within correcting the base of this by helping provide these topics and these examples of how strategy. Huge, Ashley, huge. I mean, there needs to be a strategy for everybody. And we have to break the silence. We have to talk about this.
Well, and I like you said, I think it's something it starts with starting at that really lower level with the kids, especially, and understanding, that, because I remember coming up, one of the things they used to, and this is why I say, are we as women conditioned to be abused? Because go back to when you were on the playground and a boy like pulled your hair, and most women I know that can remember their mom saying, "Oh," or their dad saying, "Well, it's just because he likes you that he does that to you." So we're literally conditioning our child to believe that if someone likes us, it means physical pain towards ourselves, right? Or I can't tell you how many times they say to a child, as a little girl, you should be seen and not heard. You should be quiet and just not cause a ruckus or cause a fight with people. Yeah. And so I feel like as women, we are definitely programmed to and conditioned to be abused. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow.
No, it's true.
Yeah, I feel like most women can go back and look in their lives and see points in time of their lives where they were made to deal with something that is not something we should be tolerating. So I'm gonna ask Rose the same question, and then Anna, I'm gonna end with you because I feel like that is such a wonderful way to end our episode. But Anna, what are your thoughts on abuse becoming a learned behavior? Because again, you and Anna both talked about as well, as like being the examples for your children and your children seeing that. And now as your children, like your children are a little bit older, so it's like now seeing what they learn and how that's manifested in their own relationships as adults. What are your thoughts on abuse becoming a learned behavior and women programmed to be abused?
I guess my mother was abused. She was smacked around by my dad, and I guess I think abuse, domestic violence is in most cases, I won't say in all cases, is a learned behaviour. I think you're not born an abuser. I think what you see is what you do. So, I mean, until the time you're 7 years old, what you see until you're 7 is probably the way that you will carry on for the rest of your life. Most of your learning is done until you're up until the age of 7. So what you're thinking, what your behaviours, whatever, they are learned behaviour until you're 7, and after 7, then you will use those behaviours carrying on into adulthood. So if up until the age of 7 you are seeing someone who is being either verbally or physically or mentally abused, then you will take those behaviours and you will most likely carry those into your adulthood, and you will then use those behaviours on your partner. So whether you're a female abusing a male or a male abusing a female, because don't forget that, domestic violence is not just male to female, it's female to male, it's female to female, it's male to male. I don't advocate just for one, the heterosexuals. I cater for and advocate for all relationships, because there's no boundary to gender. There's none. So so my question is, I've answered the question. I think it's just that it is a learned behaviour, and to get over that, either you take counselling or you you get someone to point out that you are being an abuser. So an abuser can also be informed by family members to say, well, your behaviour sucks. Really, you shouldn't treat your partner like that. And sometimes they listen and they don't. They go and seek the help that they require to overcome their learned behaviours, because they would have learned it, unless they're a sociopath or a psychopath. That's probably the only ones where it's not learned behaviour. They're actually born with it. They can't help it.
Oh,
but that's, I think that's it.
You say that and I think of Hannibal Lecter.
Yes.
But I always find this subject fascinating, because we talk about, like, I used to be fascinated with epigenetics. So it's like, how does this stuff actually transfer to genetic level? So there's more also in my book. There's this, it's also, while it can be learned, there's a genetic aspect to abuse as well, which is pretty fascinating in a whole other episode. But Anna, I would love to end with you and your thoughts on how does abuse become learned behavior, because you were the one who really touched on, like, if I stayed in this relationship, I was going to be teaching my daughter that it was okay for her relationships to look like that. And that was like my thing, I remember growing up, and I saw such a heinous version of what divorce looked like and what it meant to be a child of divorced parents. I was like, there's no way, like, I'm ever getting married. I don't want to be a divorced mom, because I've seen what that looks like. And so, I had a lot of learned conditioning from that really came out in my relationship, because it was so subconsciously averted to those things, because I had learned that's what that looked like. So I'd like your thoughts on how does abuse become abuse is learned behavior, and also, women, are we being programmed to be abused? Is that, like, do you feel like women are now being more conditioned to tolerate and take the abuse stemming out of childhood?
Yes, I definitely do. I definitely think that this is, first of all, it is definitely a learned behavior. There is an excellent book called Why Does He Do That? This was one of the best books that I read of all the books I read on domestic violence. It's written by a man named Lundy Bancroft, an American who has worked with over 2,000 abusive men for probably going on 20 years now. and he works with court mandated cases where the man, in his case, it's abusive men, is required to go to counseling. And so he has really, really good insight into this. And he explains that it is definitely learned behavior. And he explains that our society, which is this patriarchy, if anybody doesn't believe that there's a patriarchy, spend some time reading this book or spend some time in an abusive marriage like I did, and you will learn quickly that there is definitely a patriarchy. So it's these notions, I liken it almost to a virus that is passed from person to person. It's contagious. It's these notions that go from person to person, generation to generation, that are learned. And then they get passed on to the next generation until somebody interrupts the cycle. And, you know, in my case, I definitely think that my ex learned this from his father, because I saw the way his father treated his mother. And I think on a global scale, for centuries, it has been acceptable to, you know, women are viewed as less valuable than men. It's only recently that, you know, women have been allowed to vote. I mean, it's just this last century that we were allowed to vote. I mean, how many centuries were women considered their husband's property? So when you look at, and that's in many, many countries. So when you look at the history of the patriarchy, there are so many of these ideas that are part of our culture, that are ingrained in our institutions, that we don't realize we're absorbing these ideas unconsciously. And I think what happens to women, and I can at least speak about what happened to me, and I'm sure if it happened to me, it happens to many, many women. And it's really one of the greatest tragedies, is that we don't value ourselves as much as men value themselves in general. We don't see ourselves as valuable. And that may sound like that may sound outrageous to some people, but when you really look at it, you know, I'm in a mom's group here in Tampa Bay. And that is that's like an ethnological, what am I trying to say? An anthropological dig, excavation every time I go in there and read what these moms are writing. And you can just see how it's a common pattern. They do not value their contributions to their marriages, the work that so many women do, the unpaid work of childcare, of running a household, caring for the pets, all of those things that are, you know, these intangible assets that a woman, you know, intangible value, but of enormous value, that women themselves, I mean, not only does society not value that, but we ourselves don't value that. And we don't, this again may sound pretty outrageous, but we don't value ourselves as much as men do. That plays across every aspect of life. I have a friend who works in staffing, and she's told me that, you know, men have so much more confidence when they apply for jobs. Because I was looking at a job, this was a while back, and I said, oh yeah, but I don't have all the qualifications. And she goes, Anna, do you know that when men look at jobs, they go, oh, I have that qualification. If they have one qualification on the list, they have enough confidence to apply for the job. Meanwhile, a woman, if she doesn't have all the qualifications, thinks she shouldn't apply. That's one tiny example that just illustrates this difference in how we value ourselves. And it is because in our society, there is this whole hierarchy of status. And we have been told in a million ways, both subtle and overt, that our value is lower than that of men's. So this is definitely learned. And this is something that contributes to I think, to a broader prevalence of domestic violence against women. I recognize that it's also against men, but it's a much, much, much higher ratio of men against women. And a lot of that has to do with economics, because men are paid more. Men are the breadwinners in a lot of cases. They earn more than the woman does, and really all of this has only happened since the Industrial Revolution. This economic difference, but I won't go into that. My point is that we don't value ourselves. We don't value our time. We don't value our work. We don't value our contributions to our marriage. And I am saying we should, and I do now. The abuse in my situation was so bad, it woke me up. I mean, I only had to have one horrific experience, and it taught me the lesson of a lifetime. And at the core of it all is self-worth. I didn't value myself, and now I do. I have strong boundaries. I don't waste my time on stuff I don't want to waste time on. I don't spend time with people I don't want to spend time with. I don't do what I don't want to do. I only do something if I want to. I don't care about pleasing people nearly as much. I mean, I'm human, and Brene Brown says that we are wired for connection. So we all want people to like us to a certain extent. That's a human thing because of how we're biologically wired. But generally, I mean, I have a healthy dose of that, but pretty much I'm just like, okay, well, if you don't like me, that's okay. So my hope is that every person on this planet, but especially women and people of color and transgender people and people who historically have been oppressed, can come to that realization that you are valuable, you are worthy, you don't have to prove anything to anybody. You are valuable simply because you exist.
I love that. All right, you guys, and I know we were going to get to exit strategies, so I feel like the next domestic violence panel, which is going to come up in a few weeks, I want to talk specifically on exit strategies, because again, I feel like you all have everybody who comes on to us has a tremendous amount to provide. So thank you guys for sticking with me on this. Is there anything you guys would like to add before we get off here you feel would be important to contribute? Anything that you feel would be important to say right now before we get it for anybody who might be in this situation that's looking to leave? And just keep it, because we're at the end, just keep it quick.
It'll be really quick, just to add on. It doesn't, if you're in a domestically violent situation, I don't care what anybody else says, whether they think you're in abuse or not. If you think you're in abuse, then you are. You probably are. And it doesn't matter what other people think. It matters what you think. Your perception of reality is what matters. Your gut, your intuition is what matters, not anybody else. Don't look outside yourself for validation. Go within.
All right, Kirsten, I'd like your thoughts. Is there anything else you'd like to end on before we get off there that you feel is important for anyone out there to know?
I think that awareness and education is just key. And if you're curious or you have doubts that you're being abused, you probably are. That'd be my best thing to end off on a strong note.
Rose, your thoughts before we get off here? Anything you'd like to add? One last thing.
Yeah, I think it was touched on earlier. I think education needs to start in the schools to educate our children about what's acceptable behaviour, because even as we said, or someone said, he does that because he likes you. It needs to be taught that it's not okay. And the quicker that boys and girls are educated, that abuse of any kind and bullying of any kind is just not acceptable behaviour, and it's got to start in the schools as quickly as possible.
Amen to that. All right, well, thank you, ladies, so much for being on here. These panels go like that, man. So as like I said, I really feel like this subject has been one that these panels have stuck with now, like 5 episodes now we're going into this. So in every single time, you guys heard me before on here, I had to say, I'm like, I want to talk about this, but then, something will come up in the panels, like, Kirsten, you started it. It's really important to understand that what we learn in our childhood is always what is the best thing for us as we become adults. And I don't think that there's enough emphasis on learned behavior as a child and actually asking ourselves and cultivating the awareness around whether or not that's beneficial for us or the people we surround ourselves with. So for anybody out there, you know, sometimes you can have a set direction that you're going with something and something else is going to come up, and it's really going to help you to understand that situation better. So that's why, even though sometimes I have set things in mind, I always like to dig a little deeper into some other stuff. So as you guys go, as we go along, I want to continue having these conversations. So I imagine you will see these women coming back. I love all of you coming on here and just really bringing your knowledge to the table. I think it's incredibly beneficial. And for anyone out there who is going through this, please feel free to reach out to any of these women, especially if you're like, listen, I'm at this point where I want to leave. I know we didn't touch base on exit strategies, but that's definitely the next part of the show. So if anybody's wondering, you know, wanting support on leaving a situation there, and please feel free to reach out to any one of these women. They've all been through a situation, and I'm sure they have some amazing advice for you. For anybody who catches this on the replay, #replay, just to let you guys know, next Tuesday there will not be a panel. You're like, I'm going to take a little bit of a break. I'm going to take a little bit.
I'll take it for you, Ash. I got you on this. You want me to handle it? You want me to G up for you? I got this.
Oh, listen, if you want to take the panel next week, I will let you do that. I'm going to tell you guys, for anybody out there, I'm getting ready to do Life Between Lives hypnotherapy session. Anybody's on here, y'all, I'm like way into like becoming aware of what all this is. Yeah, hey, if you want to do it, I'll be more than happy. You can let me know, and then, you know, I'll help you find the guest for that. So there might be a panel next week, y'all. Pay attention.
Yeah.
You always listen. And before we go any further, for anybody who's watching this and you've heard, the TV show is getting ready to come up. It's going to release in October. So just be prepared for the changes that are getting ready to come. I'm really excited to make more announcements soon. But also catch us on Thursday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you guys for being here. Catch us on the replay, #replay. We'd love to know your thoughts. Thank you so much. We'll see y'all Thursday. Thank you, ladies.
Thanks, Ashley.